We gather as sovereign beings under the lawful design of life, encoded within each of us. In the sacred space of the Sovereign Systems Institute, we pause to recognize our jurisdiction, our capacity, and our contract with the natural order. May our words and decisions align with the resiliency code and generate sovereign wealth for ourselves and all who will follow the resilient path. Tonight, we're going to revisit the intellectual field. We're revisiting the intellectual field because of what I'm witnessing. Part one, the silence of knowing. People know what's true. They can see it. They can feel it. They recognize the patterns unfolding around them, but they're terrified to speak it because speaking truth has consequences now. Social consequences, professional consequences, relational consequences. So they stay silent. They nod along. They repeat safe opinions that require no courage, and their intellectual field collapses under the weight of that compromise. Tonight, we revisit the intellectual field, not because we didn't cover it before, but because the pressure on this field is accelerating, and most people don't realize the cost of silence. Part two, intellectual collapse looks like safety. When things destabilize, most people's first instinct is to find safety in agreement. They stop examining what they actually think and start repeating what's acceptable to say. They trade cognitive sovereignty for social belonging. It feels like wisdom. It feels like prudence. It feels like picking your battles. What it actually is intellectual surrender. You're letting external pressure determine what you're allowed to think. And once that happens, you're not thinking anymore. You're performing. Performing agreement. You're performing compliance. You're performing the opinions that keep you safe. But here's what nobody tells you. Every time you silence what you know is true, your capacity to think clearly weakens. Your intellectual field doesn't just go dormant, it atrophies. Part three, the cost of cognitive compromise. When you stop speaking what you know is true, it doesn't stay contained to that one conversation. It spreads. You compromise once to avoid conflict. Then you compromise again to keep your job. Then you compromise again to maintain relationships. And eventually, you can't remember what you actually think anymore because you've trained yourself not to. Your intellectual field becomes a mirror of whatever environment you're in. No structure, no stability, no sovereignty. You're thinking with someone else's brain, and you don't even notice anymore because the transition was so gradual. One compromise at a time. Part four. The world is destabilizing. People can feel it. Systems that used to hold are cracking. Institutions that used to provide clarity are fragmenting. Certainties that used to anchor people are dissolving. And most people don't know what to do. So they panic. They grasp for external authority to tell them it's going to be okay. They search for someone to follow, someone to believe, someone to hand them the answers. But here's the problem. If you've spent years outsourcing your thinking to institutions, media, experts, and algorithms, you have no internal compass when those systems destabilize. You don't know how to process information independently. You don't know how to examine assumptions critically. You don't know how to hold tension without collapsing into reactivity. Your intellectual field never developed sovereignty. It developed dependency. And now that the things you depended on are failing, you have nothing to stand on. Part 5. Intellectual sovereignty is the foundation. Intellectual sovereignty isn't about being right. It's about being able to hold what you know is true, even when everyone around you is collapsing into fear, confusion, or groupthink. It's about being able to process information without needing external validation. It's about being able to examine competing ideas without needing someone else to resolve the tension for you. It's about owning your cognitive process instead of renting it from systems outside yourself. That's what we teach here. Not conclusions, not answers, not prescriptions. We teach the operating system that allows you to think clearly when everything around you is in chaos. Because when the world destabilizes, the people with intellectual sovereignty don't panic. They process, they assess, they navigate, and they thrive. They don't need someone to tell them what to think. They know how to think for themselves. Part 6. The beacon in the disruption. The Sovereign Systems Institute exists because most institutions stopped teaching people how to think independently. They started teaching people how to stay dependent. Churches became consumption centers instead of capacity builders. Schools became compliance training instead of critical thinking development. Media became narrative enforcement instead of information delivery. And now people are waking up to this extraction. They're leaving those institutions in record numbers, not because they stopped wanting guidance, but because they realized the guidance was making them weaker, not stronger. They were being handed conclusions instead of being taught how to build their own. SSI is the beacon in this disruption, not because we have all the answers, but because we teach the architecture that allows you to find your own answers. The resiliency code is the operating system. The resilient path is the way through. And the intellectual field is where you prove you can navigate independently instead of waiting for someone else to rescue you. Part 7. Speaking truth rebuilds the field. If you've been silent, if you've been compromising, if you've been performing agreement instead of owning your thoughts, your intellectual field is compromised. You can't fix that by thinking harder. You can't fix that by consuming more information. You fix it by speaking what you know is true, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it costs you something. Not recklessly, not without consideration, but honestly and tactfully. Because every time you speak truth, you reinforce your intellectual field. You prove to yourself that your thinking belongs to you, not to the systems pressuring you to conform. And over time, that field strengthens. You stop needing external validation. You stop collapsing under social pressure. You stop fragmenting when the world destabilizes. You hold position because your thinking is yours. Part 8. The path through the disruption. The world will continue destabilizing. Systems will continue fragmenting. And institutions will continue failing. That's not pessimism. That's pattern recognition. And when that happens, the people who survive and thrive won't be the ones who panic and grasp for external authority. They'll be the ones who built intellectual sovereignty before it was required. They'll be the ones who can process information independently, examine assumptions critically, and hold what they know is true without needing permission from anyone. That's what we're building here. Not followers, not dependents, not people waiting for rescue. sovereign beings who can think clearly, speak honestly, and navigate the complexity of existing systems without collapsing. Your intellectual field is either sovereign or it's rented. If it's rented, the disruption will destroy you. If it's sovereign, the disruption will strengthen and improve you. In closing, it's all about holding what you know. People are afraid to speak what they know is true. The pressure is real. The consequences are real. But silence is more expensive than courage. Every compromise weakens your intellectual field. Every performance of agreement fragments your capacity to think independently. The world is destabilizing. Systems are collapsing. People are panicking. And in the middle of that chaos, SSI stands as a beacon, not with all the answers, but the architecture that allows you to find your own. Hold what you know, speak what's true, build your intellectual sovereignty before disruption requires it. Collapse is optional, but only if you own your own thinking. With that, I'm going to close this evening's ministry. Having prepared through this fellowship, we return to participate from our individual sovereignty, carrying the coherence generated here into our respective fields, in service to the lawful design of life and the continuation of this work. Next week, we're going to explore the connection field, the architecture of right relationship. Take care.